Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. It is 5:15 p.m. Tuesday, May 10th. I'm currently driving southbound on I-35 in Garvin County, Oklahoma. Just left Oklahoma City a little bit ago where I got fuel, and my tab for my fuel and DEF was a little bit over $1,000. In fact, the pump for the diesel fuel slowed down just before I hit $1,000, and so I just decided to cut it off there instead of trying to top off my tanks all the way. So I'm probably sitting with about 90% full. And I will fuel up like that about every other day. I don't know if we've talked about, or don't remember if we've talked about how often I fuel, but I will fuel about every other day when I'm out, and I run pretty hard. I always try to run about 650 miles or so every day. Or all the way to my stop, whichever I come to first. Obviously, if my stop is within 500 miles, I can't run 650. But I've had multiple day trips where I will do what I call a marathon drive, where I pretty much just drive all day long. I get in a full, solid, like 10 and a half hours or more of driving, and we'll be upwards around 650 to 700 miles. I think the most I've done was I did about seven and a quarter one day. I had pretty much no traffic the whole time. Everything was just perfect, and yeah, I was definitely able to put in just a little over 700 miles in one day. But yeah, the fuel price was just outrageous. It was like $5.55, I think, a gallon. You know, right now my dash readout says I'm getting 5.3 miles to the gallon. And for any of y'all out there that aren't truck drivers or don't really think about this kind of stuff, but you know, pretty soon you're going to be paying. Well, I guess we are going to be paying a lot more for our groceries, because it's going to take a lot more to get the groceries to the stores. I don't know if you can tell up in the horizon, but we're coming up to the Arbuckle Mountains in Colorado, or I'm sorry, Oklahoma. Got where I was at for a second. I kind of like coming through here. There was one day this winter where I was actually stranded a few hours north of Tulsa at a truck stop because of the ice, and I heard that this very small mountain range was also unpassable because of ice. The truck stop I was at is a pretty big truck stop, and they have kind of a upper and lower parking lot. The upper parking lot's not real big, but there's lots of parking in the lower parking lot, and I woke up to find a lot of trucks not even being able to make it up the hill out of the lower parking lot. People are putting their chains on and locking in their differentials, trying to just idle up the hill, trying to get on it and get up the hill, but they just kept spinning out. Eventually, a tow truck came over and was towing people out of the lower parking lot so they could continue on their journey. I had elected to not try that because, like I said, I was a few hours north of Tulsa, and the road all the way going down to Tulsa, the highway that going down to Tulsa that I would have used, was showing to be snow covered or snow packed and ice covered the whole way there. And I had actually talked to another driver that came from that area, and he said it was just absolutely ridiculous, and I wouldn't be driving any more than about 30 miles an hour for the whole way. So I decided that I wouldn't do it. waited there at the truck stop another night to see if the weather would clear up, or at least see if the temperature would rise to melt some of that ice. It did not, and I ended up just coming home because I wasn't very far from home, and delivered the load the next week. And as soon as I left the truck stop and started going the opposite way, there was nothing. I mean, it was just crazy. Literally, just south of me, all the road was snow-packed and ice-covered, and just to the north of me, there was nothing. It was like the winter weather didn't even hit. But anyway, so my truck was in the shop also. Today's Tuesday. I had started out on Sunday trying to get down to the Fort Worth, Texas area, and got an alert on my dash that basically told me I needed to stop. Went to a truck stop and ended up getting hold of my bosses, and we ended up putting the truck in the shop, and I was finally able to get started this morning, and that's a $1,500, well, no, it's about $1,700 repair bill that my boss is going to have to pay, or actually he already paid it, but that's part of trucking. I've decided that since I got a late start this week, that I was going to stay out over the weekend and work for about 10 days straight, and try to get in pretty decent loads, because I will have short weeks coming up at the end of the month because I have to appear in court. I think I told you about how I appear in court during my retirement as a cop, and so I have two cases that I have to appear in court for. And keep in mind, I've been retired a year, and they're just getting around to filing these cases. Some of it may have been because of all the COVID stuff and the courthouse has been shut down, but some of it may not have been. One case was a financial crimes case that I worked a very long time ago, and I'm not sure why. Well, I know why they filed on the guy now. It was a good case, but they didn't want to go after him on it, just because it wasn't that high of a profile case. But now he did something even more serious. So basically they just kind of went back, and in my opinion, they went back and looked up all the other cases that he had, and revisited them to see if they were chargeable. My case was chargeable, and that's why I'm going to court on him next month, or later this month, I guess. So anyway, we're coming up on the Arbuckle Mountain here in Oklahoma. We are at about mile marker 54, and like I said, we're about an hour south of Oklahoma City, maybe. So anyway, so that's my little tidbit of trucking. Oh, I guess I'll tell you guys about a little bit about my load. I actually have a load of bulldozer attachments. They are called rippers, and basically they are the parts of the bulldozer that you may see that have the big teeth that basically they just rip up the ground. It's used a lot, I think, when the ground is really solid or frozen, things like that. But I picked them up at a company that makes these rippers, and I'm taking them all the way down to Fort Worth, Texas. So yeah, that's my load. I actually kind of like hauling them. They're not. They sit on my flatbed on my trailer, really nice. They're on a pallet, and I just strap them on down. Was not like the transformers I hauled last week. Those things were just, I don't know, they didn't look that secure, but they were. These, I don't mind hauling these at all. They're really easy to secure, and they are very, very light. So anyway, so let's talk today about a guy named Mike. Mike was a very bad dude. Mike was a suspect of a homicide case, and he was also a suspect of an attempted murder case. I worked both cases. Just to kind of give you the rundown, I wasn't able to put together a prosecutable case for the murder, but I was able to put a prosecutable case together for the attempted murder. The difference would be the cooperation that I received. So let me set the stage a little bit for you. The victim of the murder was not an upstanding citizen, or what a lot of people would call an upstanding citizen. He was the leader of a gang, and this gang was involved in a lot of criminal activity. In fact, when the address for the shooting came out, I would imagine that the responding officers knew where they were going, because the house was just very well known. So the shooting comes out, and just to show you the level of cooperation that we would get on something like this, when the officers were arriving on scene, the victim's grandmother was basically yelling at them and demanding that they show her a warrant before they come on her property. Here's the deal. On a situation like that, where you have somebody that's shot laying up on the front porch, you have exigent circumstances. Our duty is to try and save that person's life. So the officers and also paramedics and ambulance personnel ended up going up on the porch, basically ignoring the grandmother, and attempted to save this guy's life. And even though we will respond to that house and know the house, it was we will respond to that house just like it's somebody that we don't know. Okay, yeah, the guy was not an upstanding citizen, but we will still work that case as if he were a quick shop clerk, a dentist, a mechanic, a doctor, a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad, whatever. We will work that murder case just like he was a regular person. So that's not going to weigh in on the things that we do, okay? Because if it did, then we would have just stood back, or the responding officers would have just stood back and said, "Oh, you're right, Grandma, we don't have a warrant. We'll just wait." And then they let him die. That's not the case. There was exigent circumstances. They got up to the porch, tried to save his life, and but was unsuccessful. So when my squad was called back for the murder, I did not answer my phone. I had turned my ringer off during the day because I was out doing something that I didn't want to be interrupted on, I forgot to turn it back on. Not a big deal, because I don't have to respond to every call out for murders, because I'm not on call. But we are expected to respond to a good portion of them. If we get to where we're not responding back at all, then we'll just get transferred out of the homicide squad. I want to say our sergeant at the time wanted us to come back to 65 to 75% of call-outs. So anyway, so when I wake up in the morning, I see that I have all these missed calls, and I knew immediately that I had missed a homicide. And I knew that I was going to catch a little bit of flack going in, and I did. My sergeant pretty much told me that since I didn't answer my phone, that this homicide was going to be mine. Basically, we would have we had a rotation where we took turns being the lead investigator of homicide cases, because being the lead investigator of a homicide case is a very important role, and it pretty much takes up all of your time for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or month, and it just does. I remember one time we had 3 murders within a 24-hour period, and that was was a crazy day. But anyway, so my sergeant was expecting me to pretty much just close it down because of the lack of cooperation we were getting. Or the lack of cooperation. Yeah, the lack of cooperation that we were getting. But I didn't. I visited the victim's grandmother and told her a couple times that, if she just were to tell me who her grandson walked outside to meet, then that would be huge for the case, because she was home when he walked outside to meet this person who I believe killed him, or at least had him killed, and or at least set him up to be killed. But she just refused. She at one point even told me that I was harassing her. At that point I kind of took offense to that, because I don't care who her son is. It's still, who her grandson is. It's still her grandson, and I want to try and offer her the same closure that I can offer any family of any homicide victim. But so I informed her that I had not at that point seen my family in about 3 days, because I'm trying to arrest the person who killed her grandson. And at that time, we pretty much knew who done it, but just because we know doesn't mean that we can do stuff about it. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Training Day with Denzel Washington. It's a very good movie. It's very entertaining. He plays a crooked cop, and at some point, he plays a crooked narcotics cop. And at some point during the movie, he says a line that is 100% true, which is, "It's not what you know, it's what you can prove." Whoever gave them the advice on that line, but like I said, you hit the nail on the head, because I knew a lot of stuff, but just because I knew it didn't mean I could do anything about it. I mean, there was a point in time when I could take a person to, the top 5, top 10. I could take them to multiple crack houses, drug houses, or crack houses, meth houses, whatever. But it didn't mean I could go kick in their door and take their drugs and money. It takes an investigation. Same way with, high dollar theft. I know who's out committing the high dollar theft, but it doesn't mean that I can go kick their door and collect evidence. So it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And basically I let her know that, because her thought was, you already know this, go arrest him. I basically let her know, just because I know who done it doesn't mean that I can arrest him, because I need things that can corroborate what I know. I need the evidence, I need statements from witnesses, and somebody may witness something and they may think that they don't hold very much information, but they really do. Okay? I've had the slightest bit of information help immensely on a case. Okay? So, and there are different reasons why people don't want to help the police, and I get it, but I kind of don't get it when it's a family member of yours who just got murdered. The suspect on this murder case, Mike, somebody actually tried to shoot him within 15 to 30 minutes of the murder. There was an incident where somebody went knocking on the door that he was living at. He was not home. He had actually fled to a casino. Excuse me. But he was not home. And some people knocked on the door of where he was living at the time. Sorry, my throat got a little dry. Right on my right, I don't know if you can see it or not, I don't think you can. Right on my right, I am passing a big lake called Lake Jean Neustadt. Lake Jean Neustadt. But anyway, as soon as this girl answered the door, and she was like a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, as soon as she answered the door, like multiple people, I think it was 3 or 4 people, just started blasting away at the front of the house. It's amazing that she didn't get hit. It's amazing that the people inside didn't get hit. But nobody got hit. And I mean, and like I said, that was within, I think it was about 30 minutes of the shooting. So they know who done it. Basically, the victim had given a dying declaration to his friends, and my city became a war zone for the weeks following. We had multiple shootings that I believe were related to that murder. It was a lot of shootouts, but nobody ever really got hit other than innocent victims. We had a guy standing at a window at his job, and a bullet came through the window and grazed him in the neck, a little bit, another inch or two to the left, and probably would have killed him. We had, there was another shootout between 2 vehicles, and this came from witnesses that were like, this is what I saw. I saw 2 random vehicles start shooting at each other, or the occupants of 2 random vehicles start shooting at each other, or somebody's driving by, starts shooting at a guy running down the street, and then that's when the guy got hit in the neck. But anyway, the 2 vehicles that were shooting at each other, or the 2 occupants of the vehicles that were shooting at each other, the only thing they hit was a school bus full of children. And so, it was actually magnified or amplified as to why we needed to try and get this under control. Like I said, my city was a war zone for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I mean, it was just crazy. The random people shooting at random people, or random people shooting at each other, just increased exponentially for that couple of weeks. But anyway, I kept hammering away at this case. I ended up finding a neighbor who, just a regular guy, worked for a living, and was just fed up with the violence in his neighborhood, and he heard the dying declaration. Dying declaration is when somebody who's dying, they name the person who killed them. That can be used. That is an exception to the hearsay law, and in certain situations, and I believe in this situation, it actually qualifies to defeat the hearsay law. Hearsay is just basically like, you heard somebody say something, but that person is no longer available or won't testify that that's what they told you. That's hearsay. But anyway, so our victim named the shooter by his prison nickname, and because this guy had just got out of prison, and he was a part of a criminal gang in prison, and had a nickname that he used in prison. Unfortunately, I was unable to positively ID his nickname in prison. I was able to unofficially say that was his nickname in prison, but unfortunately I just couldn't get anything on record. The prison officials didn't have anything on record about it, and it was just really kind of tough. But anyway, the word was that this was a paid hit contract, and he was only paid a fraction of the money, and he was actually friends with the victim. That's how much of a psychopath this guy is, because he was actually friends also with the person he tried to kill later. So anyway, that murder goes uncharged. Oh, and another kind of caveat to that is I had collected his cell phone, which I believe is still in property as evidence. because I believe it contains information that would be useful to the investigation, which would be like maybe text messages or phone calls. Probably more along the lines of text messages, but because that's how most people are communicating these days. But anyway, the phone was a BlackBerry, and I learned that if you do not have the code to a BlackBerry, that you're not breaking in. At one point, BlackBerry was the most secure phone in the world, and there were countries that actually banned ownership of BlackBerries. I actually called the company who made BlackBerry, and they said there was no way to break into a BlackBerry without if you did not have the passcode. So we're kind of dead in the water with that, with the phone. At the time, I even called the FBI, the Secret Service, and was told. Well, first I tried calling the FBI. They said they knew of no way to break into the BlackBerry at that time. And then I got turned on to the Secret Service because I had heard that them and the NSA were doing experiments on BlackBerries and trying to figure out a way to do it, or break into them. I contacted the Secret Service and I got nothing. They confirmed that they had been in fact experimenting, trying to break into BlackBerries, but they just couldn't do it. They are at the time, they were the most secure phone in the world. So basically, he gets away on that murder. One other thing that also came up, he right after the murder, our super secret squirrel unit put up hidden cameras. Basically, anybody that does covert operations, we call them super secret squirrels. I've even been called a super secret squirrel because I've done covert operations, mainly covert surveillance on people. But anyway, they put up hidden cameras because we wanted to kind of monitor the goings on at that house after the murder. Our cameras, they got made because, well, we may be super secret squirrels, but the criminals are pretty smart and they know what's out of place and when it's out of place. But I had heard from a very reliable source who witnessed this who witnessed this altercation, that the suspect showed up to the house while there was a barbecue going on. It was kind of a wake for the victim, and he was approached by one of the older gang members who probably was next in line to take over, and was told that he didn't care if there were cameras around or not, that he was going to shoot him if he did not leave. The suspect tried to plead his case, but the OG was not having it and basically ran him off. This was definitely witnessed by a person, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough to get the charge. So anyway, so he goes without being charged on this murder, and ends up trying to kill another friend of his. Quite a bit of time had passed at this point. And also, like, when I interviewed the suspect, when I interviewed Mike, what I can tell you is Mike was a very, very smart person, and in my opinion probably could have been anything that he wanted. Even if he chose drug dealer, he could have risen to the very top of that and could have been, in my opinion, a very major importer of narcotics into our city, our state, maybe even the country. I mean, the guy was just that intelligent, articulate, well-spoken, and I mean, it really is just a shame. The guy could have been a high-level politician. He could have been an attorney. He could have been anything he wanted as long as he applied himself. But he liked the violence. So fast forward to the second shooting. And quite a bit of time had passed, and to be honest with you, I don't know exactly how much off the top of my head, but it was quite a bit. Basically, he meets his friend to buy some marijuana, or to get fronted some marijuana, and to pay back an old drug debt to him. Because basically, what happens a lot of times is people will get fronted some weight of drugs, whether it be marijuana, cocaine, meth, or whatever, and then they will take that and they will go sell it for their price. They will make a little bit of money on it, and then they will return and pay the original dealer their money. Well, I believe the story was that Mike owed his friend a little bit of money for being fronted some marijuana, and he had told his friend that he had his money, but he also wanted to be fronted some more marijuana. Well, the friend shows up, and Mike decides he wants to try and rob him. The friend ends up running away, and Mike shoots him in the back multiple times. The guy ended up living and giving naming Mike as the suspect that shot him. I was able to arrest Mike pretty quickly, but during the initial stages of the investigation, the victim of the attempted murder was also an armed career criminal. He had some ammunition to a handgun in his pocket, like in his jacket pocket, I believe. And I asked him about that because it does play a role in how I'm going to work my investigations. Because no matter what, if there's evidence, I have to investigate that evidence and present it to the DA's office. So it's important to know why he had ammunition, because he's a convicted felon and a known drug dealer, or self-admitted drug dealer, I guess. He told me that when he met Mike, Mike told him that he was going to need this and put the ammunition in his pocket, and then pulled out his gun and started to shoot him as he ran away. I called BS on that, but that's the story that he kept sticking with. I knew that if he kept sticking with the story, then he was going to do some irreversible damage, and that ultimately the case may not even get charged. I ended up finding, or at least Mike's car was found at the casino, just like the last case. He ran to the casino, and I want to say that I suspected this because he had gone to the casino right after the first murder, and I want to say that I had either casino security or that county's sheriff's department or something go look for that car for me, and they found it. Ultimately, a search was done of that car, and lo and behold, 3 handguns were found in the car. So one handgun would have belonged to Mike. One handgun would have belonged to his getaway driver, because he had a getaway driver for the robbery. And then the other handgun, I believe, belonged to my victim, because it was the same caliber of ammunition that he had in his pocket. Don't 100% remember, but I believe it was a .357 handgun with .357 ammunition, and I believe it was a revolver, and I believe the other 2 guns were semi-automatics. But in any case, I confronted my victim about the gun, and lo and behold, he decides to give me even a more far-fetched story of, well, Mike also told him that he was going to need that, and tossed it to him, and he dropped it and ran. Basically, I ended up calling BS on that as well, and I ended up meeting with the district attorney and the federal prosecutors, and at that point, the victim had a lawyer And I believe the lawyer was actually appointed by the DA's office because it was one of those things where we need to investigate this victim and he needs a lawyer, or at least some things need to happen with the victim where he's going to need a lawyer between him and the DA's office to kind of work out some kind of a deal. But basically, the DA's office and the federal prosecutor both drafted letters or promises of no, they won't charge him for being an armed career criminal. And I remember in the meeting, the federal prosecutor asked me that if this guy was worth it, because he was actually looking at more time for possessing a firearm than the guy was who actually shot him. Okay, the guy that shot him, he also had a criminal history, had obviously been in prison and all that. It just wasn't as extensive, and was going to get less years in prison than the armed career criminal. I want to say that the victim, if convicted of possessing a firearm, which he was later by a whole separate case, the victim was looking at like 15 years in prison just for having a handgun. But anyway, so he got a promise of no prosecution, and then basically gave the accurate story of what happened. The lying that he done was repairable, and that was something that was very well documented. It was in my reports, it was recorded on interviews, and it was repairable because he's lying to try and keep himself out of trouble, and he's lying about something that wasn't really directly related to why he got shot or who shot him. So it was repairable. So Mike ultimately was charged, and I remember he had done some things in jail before court to try and orchestrate his innocence, but there were all kinds of people coming forward that were basically like, hey, Mike asked me to do this, Mike asked me to say that, because they didn't want to help Mike. What was I was going to bring up something else about that shooting. Oh, I remember what it was. So Mike was a very violent person, and I don't know if you've seen my video about the crooked jewelry store owner, but Mike was actually I actually was able to link Mike to him during the jewelry store case, and the jewelry store case came after this shooting. So Mike had texted. Mike had a thing going on where he would walk into a jewelry store, and he was doing this across the state. I had a couple of different agencies call me and ask me about him because he was their prime suspect on doing these kinds of things. And I think pretty much when they found out that he was going to be convicted of the attempted murder or the aggravated battery, whichever it was he was convicted of, I think they basically just decided they weren't going to pursue their cases. But what he would do is he'd go into these jewelry stores and talk the jewelry store owner into letting him compare a couple of diamonds. As soon as the jewelry store owner would give him those diamonds, he would make a break for it, or at least when he had the chance, he would make a break for it. How he was connected to the crooked jewelry store owner was he actually sent that jewelry store owner a text message that was still saved in his phone, because this is a total different phone, and we were able to break into it or didn't have a passcode, one of those two things. And there was a text message on there that told the jewelry store owner that he was about to come in possession of 2 diamonds, and he gave the cut, the clarity, and size of these diamonds, and asked him what he could do for him. There was a reply, but I want to say I couldn't read the reply. But in any case, he was connected to that case. So in going through his phone, I also found some text messages that he had traded with his cousin. And I want to talk to his cousin about these text messages. And it just kind of solidifies how violent Mike was. What kind of a criminal he really was. So I call the cousin, totally cold caller. She has no idea that I'm wanting to talk to her about this case. She has not been talked to about this. And I call her and I introduce myself and tell her that I want to talk to her about some messages that her and Mike exchanged. Immediately, and I mean without hesitation, she goes into, oh my God, I think that he was trying to rob my store, and then goes into immediate defense mode and was like, but I promise I didn't tell him anything, and this, that, and the other, and he's trying to rob my store, and I promise I didn't tell him anything. And I eased her mind. I told her, I said, it's very clear that you were avoiding his questions. Because basically, I mean, he was asking questions like, if the armored truck driver, she worked at a check cashing place, and he wanted to know if the armored truck drivers were armed when they delivered the money. He wanted to know where they stored the money, on site, all kinds of stuff. I believe that, he really wanted to knock off an armored truck as they were making this delivery. Something else I learned during this investigation was that he was bored of stealing a couple of diamonds at a time and wanted to go into a jewelry store, guns up, and rob a jewelry store, just straight up rob a jewelry store. I mean, it's just crazy. But he was just looking for a driver. I also learned that his favorite movie was the movie Heat. If you haven't seen it, it's a very good movie. Got a lot of very good actors, and it's just very, very entertaining. And it is a movie about a violent group of criminals, and at the end, they get in a big, huge shootout. And from what I understand, he basically idolized that shootout and had expressed, I think, the want to do something like that. So that's how just crazy stupid this guy was, just stupid violent, and when the prosecutor had asked me if the victim was worth it, I had already knew all that stuff about him, and I explained to the federal prosecutor that absolutely this guy's worth it, because the suspect, Mike, is a very violent person that could totally disrupt innocent people's lives by doing the things that he wants to do. Hopefully, Mike calms down in prison and decides to not lead a life of crime, but I'm not too hopeful, because he was definitely good at the drug dealing. In fact, when I was able to get into his phone on the one shooting, he actually had a video in his phone talking about his level of drug dealing and how he delivers and how he sells boulders instead of rock. I mean, he was just, and he would flaunt a bunch of money in the video. So fast forward some time, and I go to the prison where Mike is, and it has nothing to do with him. I actually go there to get a DNA sample from another suspect of a 1981 murder case that I talked to you guys previously about. And while there, I do my thing and I end up leaving. Okay? I have no interaction with Mike. Well, the next day, my desk phone rings and it comes up as a cell phone, and I answer it. And he says my name, and he says, "Do you know who this is?" And I immediately said, "Hello, Mike," because I knew exactly who it was just from the sound of his voice. That's how much time I spent with this guy. And like I said, there's almost a level of respect as like how intelligent he is and how he could have done anything, that he wanted, but there's also a level of disappointment that he didn't. I mean, I truly think that this guy could have been a pillar of society. But anyway, he goes into telling me that, you know, he wants to tell me who killed the victim in the first case, and I called him out and said, you did. And I said, either you did or the guy that was with you did. One thing I forgot to tell you in that case is I used his cell phone records to actually triangulate his area, or the areas that he was in, which I tracked him to the casino. But he was within, I want to say it was like a 4 to 6 block radius. I mean, it was far, but it wasn't far. It was just kind of one of those things that in my world, it wasn't far from the victim's house. And I could tell that he was driving around because he was hitting off of different cell towers. But I also knew he had a person with him, and that person didn't even belong in those neighborhoods because he was actually part of a rival gang and probably would have been shot on sight in that neighborhood. But anyway, so Mike wanted to tell me who killed him, and I called him out. And he just continued his defensive, no, I didn't, but I can help you, yada, yada, yada. Then he wanted to tell me who killed another person. This was actually a kid that was possibly struck by a stray bullet. He said he knew who done that one. I informed him that that one actually happened while he was in prison, and I don't see how he would know. He told me he did have information on that and other cases, and basically I blew him off because of what I know about Mike. He's a sociopath, psychopath, whatever. I'm not a psychologist, so I may be using the wrong terms, but he's just not a good, trustworthy person. And the DA's office actually wanted somebody to go talk to him. I refused, and they were going to send another detective until I had a meeting with the DA's office to kind of give them the backstory, because I think the attorney that was involved didn't really know who Mike was and did not know about or know the ins and outs of Mike's cases. So then they basically kind of ruled that anything that he says probably won't be able to be credible. So that's where we're at. That was Mike. Mike's a bad person. You know, I went kind of long, and I hope you enjoyed the view of me driving down I-35 on my way to Texas. And I'm actually not too far from the Texas border. I'm thinking about stopping. I'll have about 100 miles to drive in the morning, and really I'm thinking about stopping at this truck stop up here that's close to a casino, and thinking about playing a little poker tonight, because I am a poker player. Haven't been very good at it recently, or at least I've had some really bad luck, but you know, it is what it is. Anyway, so that's that. If you like my videos, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Hopefully I'll figure out how to really get some attention on these videos, doing the hashtags. I've made a couple of short videos. I made one just kind of showing an area where I drove this semi truck, basically through a farmer's field, through a swamp, and it got a lot of views, and I'm really not sure how. But anyway, if you guys like this stuff, like it, share it. If you want to give me some feedback, constructive criticism, whatever, you know. Tell me what you want to hear, because I promise you, if you're liking this stuff, I got a lot more. Until next time.